Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and we finally got some class updates for the patch 8.3. With patch 8.3, this is the first time we've got any relevant class changes. This is actually pretty exciting because this is the first class changes that are massive for patch 8.3. Prior changes have mostly been to the essences or corruptions, but these are actual class changes. In this video, I want to take a look at the full list of class changes, which I expect to be expanded by a little bit before the Tuesday reset, and explain these changes, how they will affect your class or spec in relevant ways. There's changes to PvE aspects of the game, but also PvP aspects as well. Starting off in the PvE change, Restoration Druids Rejuvenation is slightly less mana expensive now, same for Efflorescence, and Tranquility Direct Healing is increased by 11%. Blizzard actually included a developer's note on this one, so I don't need to explain. These changes should improve Restoration Druids rate healing without much impact it already has on dungeons or arenas. So this overall should be a buff. It's not a massive buff as it only hits 3 abilities. It's 3 pretty big abilities as you use, but this is simply just to give them a little bit more throughput instead of falling behind other healers. Marksman Hunters are getting a buff, as well as other classes that are just a flat damage increase. Damage increases are nice, but they're not really there to solve any core issues. Sometimes a class might struggle in a raid environment or a dungeon environment simply because of the way that it was designed. So your Marksman Hunter isn't going to go from doing 0 AoE damage to 1 billion, but this change does allow players that want to play Marksman for heroics in Neolotho or getting through a dungeon. You don't need to be specifically swapping to Beast Mastery just to perform well. Marksmanship Hunters simply don't scale well with gear, so this buff is there for anybody who plays MM to do a little bit extra base damage. This is a nice buff for any Marksman Hunter mains, but overall isn't going to be super impactful in their position on DPS. Woodwalker Monks also got a buff for 5%. This isn't going to be super impactful in dungeons and raids. If you're a Woodwalker main, getting through Mythic Plus keys as well as defeating Neolotho and Heroic shouldn't be too much of an issue if you choose to stay as a Woodwalker. This is, however, going to be quite a nice buff for PvP, since this is where Woodwalkers are actually performing really well at. So Woodwalkers rejoice for 5% extra damage. Frost Mages is another spec that's generally behind Fire and Arcane. This buff I don't think is going to make them super impactful. However, if you prefer to play Frost Mage in PvP where they have seen some success, Frost Mages should like this buff in general. Oh hey, Blizzard decided to finally buff Enhancement Shamans by a whole 3%. But in jokes aside, this is actually quite a nice buff for dungeons. I love running my Enhancement Shaman through dungeons, and while it's not the strongest melee or the tankiest, the damage they perform is actually quite cool. Glass Cannon playstyle is super fun for Enhance. This will make him a little bit stronger in raids, a little bit stronger in dungeons, but I don't think it's going to make us any more of a powerhouse than we really aren't in PvP. It's better than nothing, but Shamans have been in a weird spot, and I think Blizzard at this point is just banking on making Enhancement much stronger come Shadowlands. Out of all the 3 DPS specs, Affliction and Destruction are wrecking it in charts. Demonology has been behind quite a bit. So Blizzard is buffing this spec by 5% as well. Not insanely impactful, but I haven't seen a lot of Demonology Warlocks recently, so I don't know how strong they are, if any of them are strong at all, but hopefully with this buff we'll see more of them around. And then surprise, surprise, Blizzard actually made a couple changes to PvP, which actually I find exciting every single time. Whether it is buffs or nerfs, I feel like every single season in PvP, there should be a bit of a rotation, a change of guard in a sense. Buff the classes that are very much underperforming, and nerf the ones that are way overrepresented. So for me, I'm a huge fan of any of these updates. Let's take a look at everything that Blizzard is going to be adding to the PvP side of the game. Blizzard decided to make tanks a little bit less tankier. They are increasing the amount of damage you take by 50% from players instead of 40%. So essentially, if you're a DPS attacking a tank, you'll do 10% more damage to them. I don't think this is going to be as impactful as everybody says, and it definitely will not kill off any tanks if you see one in a battleground. However, if you run into a tank that's giga stacked with a bunch of corruptions inside of an arena and you have to wait until 1 billion dampening before you can even land a kill, the tank is going to have a massive advantage. So I think this is where Blizzard was trying to take this nerf into. make tanks a little bit less tankier. Think of it like this: tanks are getting better gear like everybody else, and that gear is going to make him even tankier. It's going to allow him to mitigate damage better, so this buff is simply to offset the better gear we're getting. Essentially, I feel like tanks are going to be a thorn in your side, especially if they are a bear druid, but maybe this might make him a little bit more manageable. Time will tell. They also decided to nerf Death Knight's Death Strike. So now for Unholy and Frost, it will now only heal for 20% of the damage taken while engaged in combat instead of 40, which is a pretty big nerf. And the minimum is only going to be a 5% of maximum health instead of 10. This is quite a big nerf, as we see a lot of Death Knights utilize Death Strike in PvP. So them being super self-sustainable, this is to make arenas, particularly 2v2s and 3v3s, a little bit more manageable. Death Knights just scale super well. The more damage you do to them, the more they heal for. So this change is simply to offset that. And they even nerfed Blood Death Knights even more. I guess those guys were a little bit running rampant in an arena or two. Again, a Death Knight with full corruptions actually did quite a bit of damage, and they have a lot more powerful weapons to pick from inside of the arena. Pretty big nerf happened to mages, and this one made me scratch my head. Ice Barrier, Blazing Barrier, and Prismatic Barrier now absorb 40% less damage when engaged with enemy players. Were mages always that tanky? I don't think so. I think this is mostly a nerf to curb the meta of Rogue Mage. Rogue Mage is a composition that puts a lot of control on the enemy, leaving you as the DPS of the group very little time to focus down the Mage or the Rogue. You really don't want to hit the Rogue because they'll just evasion everything and Cloak of Shadows all your damage, so you hit the Mage because they're squishier. But with how little uptime you have on the Mage, that absorb does quite a bit of absorption really. So I think this is what Blizzard is really trying to do. It's trying to curb mages, Ice Barrier, Blazing Barrier, and Prismatic Barrier, which might have grown stronger with a better gear. You get far more intellect in our gear sets with the new pieces, so Blazing Barrier, Ice Barrier, and Prismatic are just basically stronger. So this should make mages feel more paper-like, which I feel like they've always have been. As a rogue, I've never had an issue fighting mages, but you guys are more than welcome to let me know in the comments if you think this one might have been a little bit too harsh of a nerf. Finally, we have a nerf to Warlocks and their tankiness. Affliction and Destruction. I like how they did this for Affliction too. Demon Armor now will only increase the stamina by 5% instead of 10, and it now increases your armor only by 90% instead of 150. This has a couple different parts. First of all, the stamina increase was great with certain stamina-based corruptions. The armor made them simply tankier. We got brand new gear from the brand new raids and dungeons, which has higher armor values. So the demon armor that we had of the old was just becoming way too lucrative. I think not a lot of people will miss this change, at least if you are not a warlock. How many of you guys have been locked out by a destruction warlock into, let's say, a succubus seduction, into a fear, chaos bolt, death coil, chaos bolt, shadow fury, chaos bolt, and after breaking through all those chaos bolts in that full CC chain to then get on the warlock and do almost 0 damage because of demon armor, definitely didn't feel all that good. So any class that's a physical class should be able to hit Warlocks a little bit harder. I don't think Blizzard is trying to make Warlocks completely paper. I think what they originally tried to do with the Demon Armor from the original nerf is to make him feel less of a plate class like a Warrior, Death Knight, or a Paladin, but rather more of like a mail-wearing class like a Shaman or a Hunter, in terms of the tankiness that they can take of damage. They don't want him to be completely clothy like a priest or a mage if they do end up taking this defensive talent. But the only way you really offset it is by, well, making this talent a little bit weaker now that we got better gear, better armor, and more higher quality end game gear. And I think that's all it really comes down to. I don't think we're going to start seeing Affliction Warlocks ever, because Affliction Warlock is just not great in PvP, but Destruction Warlocks that are in arenas and battlegrounds, they're still going to be fairly tanky, but not complete tanks, like literal army tanks. They're going to be quite durable, but not nearly as durable as before. Thank you guys so much for checking out this update. This has been everything that's happening to classes in World of Warcraft patch 8.3. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see all of you in the next one.